When you think of football in 1990, you're probably thinking of something like this,
Nice catch by Clayton.
or maybe something like this.
They go the other way to Rice over the middle.
The NFL was huge in 1990 and its popularity was only growing.
Touchdown.
But I'm going to tell you what, the thing is, I don't remember much about the NFL in 1990 because I was like 6 years old. But when I think of football in 1990, the first thing that I think of are the old Pro Set football cards. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about, one of the most beautiful Pro Set card designs of all time. The 1990 Pro Set football card set contained 800 cards, making it the largest football set ever up to that time. And like with the 1989 Pro Set football set, the cards here are extremely attractive. 1989 Pro Set looked great, but still had this thick border, which was typical of sports cards of the 1980s. By 1990, the border on the side was gone, which put an emphasis on the extremely high quality photography. Of course, if you're a serious collector of sports cards, you're probably going to stay as far away from the Pro Set football products as you possibly can. Do you know why? It's because there's almost like an infinite number of these cards out there, and I'm not even joking. Now, to understand how this happened, you have to realize first that there was basically no demand for vintage football cards in the late 1980s. As this New York Daily News article shows, the 1957 Topps Johnny Unitas rookie card sold for about $60 back in 1988, despite the fact that it was really scarce. It's worth a lot more today, of course, but the truth is that vintage football cards just did not have the same epic feeling and design as vintage baseball cards. And the traditional Topps football cards gave us a lot of boring shots of players warming up in preseason football camp. So the whole idea behind Pro Set was to create some excitement in the football card collecting community. Lud Denny, who's the guy who created Pro Set down in Dallas, wanted to make the cards easily accessible to everybody. Basically what he wanted is he wanted to get kids into collecting football cards, since kids didn't collect football cards at the time. And that meant making cards that kids actually wanted to collect and making a whole ton of the cards so that the kids could afford them. And so, unlike other card companies, Denny's Pro Set had a direct agreement with NFL Properties, which is how Pro Set cards managed to have those great in-game action shots. Denny also wanted to put an emphasis on getting cards from packs, and so he decided not to follow the trend of creating complete factory sets to sell directly to customers. And there were other fun and frustrating innovations like creating special unlisted cards that were deliberately short printed. In theory, your 1989 Pro Set football collection is incomplete unless you have this card, the short printed Santa Claus card. This card, numbered 1989, was never inserted into packs and was only available to people with direct connections to Denny's company. And that's not the only time that Denny pulled a stunt like that. Actually, he pulled a stunt like that basically every year. You see, Denny understood the collector mindset. He knew that the best way to get people to buy his product was to bend the rules and to try to at least create a perception of scarcity, and this worked extremely well. When the first series of 1989 Pro Set was printed in the early summer, Denny accidentally printed about 10,000 cards for Refrigerator Perry, even though he did not have permission from Perry to do so. The Perry card is not the most expensive in the world, but it's still pretty valuable. Anyway, Pro Set promptly repeated the feat with Eric Dickerson in 1990. Denny's philosophy seems to have been to print first and ask permission second. This card isn't worth quite as much as the 1989 Perry, but it's up there. And Denny apparently kept a stash of those Dickerson cards in his desk, presumably to sell on the secondary market when the time was right. So yeah, there's a lot of really sketchy stuff going on here. I mean, Upper Deck was a sketchy company that engaged in all sorts of shenanigans back in those days, like reprinting error cards and other practices that are very questionable ethically. But in the case of Pro Set, they didn't even try to hide their shady practices. For example, whenever the press asked Denny about the Dickerson card, his response was always something designed to get people to go buy and open more packs, something about how he didn't know how many cards were actually placed in packs. And of course, Denny made sure to talk up the 1990 Santa Claus card in hopes of making it as legendary as the 1989 card was. While the 1990 Santa Claus is basically worthless, Denny's knowledge of public relations got the card into newspapers all over North America. And it's really not a bad-looking card when you come down to it. It also included a pretty well-done poem on the back. So back then, Denny used to call Pro Set the living set. It's basically because the company would make modifications to certain cards during the print run, which created this insane number of variations and which has made life extremely difficult for collectors who absolutely need to have one copy of everything. And the whole thing in 1990 was released in 2 different series, plus there was this certain final update set that you had to mail in to get. Denny basically used every single known sports card trick in the book to get his products to sell, and it worked. In fact, there are actually 2 different cards numbered card 800. The offense card featured Emmitt Smith, named Pro Set's Offensive Rookie of the Year, and the defensive card featured Mark Carrier of the Bears, the Defensive Rookie of the Year. This was a pretty creative idea, though Denny didn't do quite as much with this as he could have. So as you can see here from the checklist on the back of this sealed final update pack, both cards were included together, so one is not more scarce than the other. And of course, there are still tons of these out there, and they're really not worth much money. But again, if you take out this investment mentality that people have these days, if you just look at the cards for what they are, Pro Set was nothing short of awesome. I mean, there were a whole ton of really creative ideas in this set, things that card companies today really should look at doing again. It was not just about creating artificial scarcity by using serial numbers and all of that junk. Now, this was about creating actual excitement around a set. Now, the end goal, sure, was to make a ton of money, but it was also to get kids to start collecting football cards. This was not just about milking the gambling addicts for all that they're worth. Anyway, in addition to the base set, you had tons and tons of insert sets. For example, Series 1 packs included one of these Super Bowl collectible cards in each pack with a vintage Super Bowl program on the front. The back included the final score, a description of the game, and a picture of the Super Bowl ring, which is a really well thought out card design. Again, these cards are not worth a whole ton of money today, obviously. But if you were a kid interested in learning more about the sport, these cards were really, really cool. That's the thing about Pro Set's football cards. These really were sets designed for football fans, not just for card collectors or gamblers. And they were also designed to try to make card collectors in general into football fans. Honestly, when I look back at this set, I think it was absolutely brilliant. There was also a card for Super Pro, which was a Marvel Comics superhero that didn't last very long. So I had a copy of this comic when I was a kid, I read it all the time, and it was special. Super Pro would do super football moves to catch bad guys or something like that. His original story was about going to the Football Hall of Fame in Canton, Ohio to meet up with some NFL memorabilia collector. The collector made some kind of magical football uniform or something, whatever. Anyway, then the bad guys came in, and the bad guys used original game film to tie up the hero and set him on fire. And so he was given superpowers or something like that by the combination of original film, fire, and the water from the fire extinguishers. And that turned him into a superhero. Anyway, it's kind of interesting, but it's not quite as good as classics like Superfan. Yeah, anyway, I think that Marvel made like a year's worth of those Super Pro comics and then everybody forgot all about them. But he's been made immortal by having an insert card in 1990 Pro Set. Well, he's immortal among the few of us who actually know who he was. Anyway, Series 2 included insert cards for Super Bowl MVPs, and the idea was more of the same, a focus on the history of the sport to try to get kids interested. The artwork on the front of these cards is actually really good, and the backs featured photographs from the games themselves, which was also a really good idea. There was also a card to commemorate Super Bowl 24, done up in the style of 1989 Pro Set and designed to frustrate and annoy collectors. It wasn't much of a game, but it was a pretty good idea to get people to buy these packs like crazy. And then you've got weird stuff like this Payne Stewart PGA Tour card. I don't know what they were thinking here. But of course, the big card was this Vince Lombardi Trophy hologram. They only made 10,000 copies of this card, and it's the most valuable card in the set, especially if you can get it a high grade. So I guess that there actually is at least some reason to buy up all the unopened packs and boxes and cases of this set that are still out there. And let me tell you, there are tons of unopened packs and boxes and so on. So if you want some fodder for your pack opening YouTube channel, check out one of these babies. A buy it now listing will run you back maybe $30 including shipping, and you can talk it down if you want. And seriously, it's not a bad idea if you just want to relax and open up some wax. Now before I move on from the 1990 Pro Set, there's one more thing about this set that I need to mention. I have to mention the ultra rare Cincinnati variations. And this is where you finally encounter true scarcity. The story here is that Pro Set gave packs of these cards to 4th grade students in 29 different schools in Cincinnati. The kids got a different 25 card pack every week for 15 straight weeks. Anyway, the fronts are exactly the same as other Pro Set cards from 1990. The backs had a question, like a school question, and only the teachers had the answers to the questions. Cards of star players are extremely rare and are quite valuable, at least among the few people who know that this is a thing. I don't think that this was the best educational tool in the world, but it's a pretty fascinating variation of an extremely popular set. Anyway, this Barry Sanders from that set, card number 1, is probably the most notorious 1990 Pro Set football card, and the math question on the back is really just a concealed advertisement for the NFL. Anyway, you need to keep your eyes out for those fact cards, but you also need to be very careful. There are a ton of people out there who have taken normal Pro Set cards and who are trying to pass them off as fact cards. Do your research ahead of time. In particular, look at the back of the card. If it doesn't have a question, if it has stats and the Pro Set whatever paragraph that they wrote or whatever, you're dealing with somebody who's trying to defraud you. Anyway, Pro Set took up most of the oxygen in the room in 1990. But as common as these packs were back then, Pro Set was not the only company in the game. In fact, there were more companies making football cards in 1990 than in any single year in the history of the sport. So like I said, this was a golden age, and the quality of these cards was a lot higher than it used to be. For example, a company named High Pro started selling cards in 1990 in hopes of riding the back of Pro Set's success. The base set seems to have been called Action Packed and included these golden card packs. The cards themselves are okay, though they're not quite as dramatic and exciting as the Pro Set cards. When you look at the backs, though, you can see the obvious Pro Set influence. Anyway, there are tons of these cards out there, and they're okay, though they're really not worth much money. Actually, the alternative high Pro Sets are much more interesting than the rather boring base set. For example, there was this 84 card rookie update set that came out a little bit later into the season. Unlike the Topps traded sets, these cards were actually released and sold in packs. And then there was this All Madden team set, which was a great idea. John Madden was already a big name in 1990, even though this is before his video game series really became big. This 58 card set was sold as a single factory sealed package. However, you could also buy individual packs of 6 cards each. That's a pretty obscure set these days, but there is another variant of the High Pro set that is extremely scarce and is almost completely unknown, and this one will really blow your mind. If you were a reader of the New York Times, you probably saw this article back in July 1990 about a Braille variant of the High Pro set. These were expensive. A 6-card pack was $2.50, and a full set of 280 cards would cost $120. There were a few of the standard human interest articles about these cards, after which they were mostly forgotten by collectors. You can find them if you look, but they are expensive, especially in high condition, and they might not be all that attractive to you if you can't read Braille. So High Pro was going for that media-friendly angle, but they simply couldn't keep up with Lou Denny and Pro Set. The funny thing though is that High Pro sets lasted longer than Pro Set. The thing is, High Pro kept going until 1997, which is when it finally gave in. Pro Set only lasted a couple years. Anyway, there were more traditional companies that were also making football cards in 1990 in addition to Pro Set and High Pro, including some companies that were coming back to football for the first time in a very, very long time. For the first time since 1963, Fleer created a set of football cards that featured individual players. Fleer's 1963 set featured a pretty bland design and heavily airbrushed cards. Fleer did make team action cards throughout the 1970s and into the 80s, but there were no player names since Fleer did not have the NFLPA license. Anyway, the 1990 Fleer football cards are okay, though the borders really drive me nuts. The backs are certainly colorful, even though it looks like a 5-year-old made the color selection. Anyway, these are probably not going to be anybody's favorite football cards. But if you want some colorful 1990 cards that are cheap, this is where to look. Anyway, then you had 2 other card companies from 1989, right? You had Score, which had a much better looking set than the year before, and you had Topps, which I guess was still kind of trying, maybe? 1990 Score football looks simply fantastic. The backs look better than ever, and I think the overall design is probably the best of the year. I've got to wonder how in the world they managed to take some of these action shots. And the backs just have this real high quality feel to them. It feels a lot more professional than the baseball sets the Score was putting out at the same time. Of course, these cards were available everywhere and were printed in huge quantities. Like Pro said, Score went for dividing everything up into 2 different series. And the pack design is fantastic, some of the best looking football card packs I've ever seen. But there were just so many of these cards printed and so many different pack variations that it's really hard to keep up with them all. Once again, that's following the basic junk wax philosophy of the time. The goal was to get as much of this product into the hands of as many collectors as possible with absolutely no thought about whether these cards would ever be worth anything in the future. The base set, frankly, is worthless. In fact, it's probably worth less than the cost of shipping all 660 cards. The rookie and traded set is worth a little bit more though, especially if you can get it sealed. That set is only worth money because of this Emmitt Smith rookie card, which can be tough to get in high condition. Honestly, you're probably better off just skipping the box and only buying that one card since the rest of the cards are worthless. Score also came out with this 100 card supplement set for the hottest and rising stars. Honestly, the packaging here is more interesting than the cards. It might be worth it to see if you can score a Gem Mint 10 Dan Marino card, maybe. Even still, this looks just like the base set version of the card. I don't really see what all the hype is about. Anyway, last but not least, you've got the top set. Actually, because of how this top set looks, I should change that. This is the absolute least of the 1990 football cards. This set sucks. While the other companies were figuring out how to improve their design, Topps went for thick borders and lots of ugly looking clip art. This set is hideous. The fronts look really boring. At least the backs are readable, but these are the worst football card backs of 1990. Anyway, there are some superstar cards, but they're all worthless. In fact, even the Topps traded set with the Emmitt Smith rookie card is worth basically nothing. Topps was really reluctant and slow to make changes to its basic card design process. So by 1990, most of Topps' competitors in football cards were making cards on high quality cardboard with vivid photos. Topps was basically the only company left that was using crappy cardboard and making really ugly looking cards with photos that showed nothing. And it's kind of bizarre when you look at it. I mean, even the wax boxes look lame and boring. The pack design looks like it could have been from any season in the past 20 years. There are some variants, for example, some of these 1,000-yard insert cards come with a legal disclaimer on the back. You have to look close at the bottom to see it. It says Topps football player cards are not manufactured, sponsored, or authorized by any team or league. And I'm guessing that they had to put that disclaimer on because ProSet was advertising its cards as being endorsed and sponsored directly by the NFL. I'm not sure that I understand the difference between what Topps was saying and having the NFL and NFLPA licenses, but then again, I'm not a lawyer, I just don't know. Anyway, the only 1990 Topps football cards to really care about these days are the Topps Tiffany cards. Like it did with its baseball cards, Topps made a high quality and glossy version of its football cards called Topps Tiffany. These are actually readable and honestly probably should have been the base set to begin with. These are really the only 1990 Topps football cards that are worth anything, and even then the price is a lot lower than you would think given how rare these are. Honestly, the problem is that these cards just look ugly, plain and simple. Anyway, I don't know what you think, but I think 1990 Topps football is the absolute worst of the Topps football cards. These are hideous. And anyway, there you have it for 1990. The story of football cards in 1990 really is the story of ProSet, with everybody else sort of melting into the background. And like I said, the cool thing about ProSet is that you can still buy boxes for as much as you could in 1990, maybe even cheaper. I seriously think this is one of the best football card sets of all time, even if the cards are not worth a ton of money. ProSet made football card collecting fun, and in the end, that's what really matters. But everything changed again in 1991 because Upper Deck entered the football card market, and that really changed things. That's also the year that we first saw Stadium Club and Fleer Ultra, and this emphasis on making the highest quality cards possible. Now this really was the golden age for sports card collecting, and even Topps made certain improvements so that it wouldn't be left behind in the dust. But that's all going to have to wait for next time, so I'll see you guys then.